Native people, native culture, native knowledge. Hi, I'm Jeannie Green, bringing you award-winning Heartbeat Alaska.
Bringing you national and international Native news, this is award-winning Heartbeat Alaska, the premier Native voice in Native programming.
There's a heartbeat, louder than thunder, revolution is in the air. There's a heartbeat deep inside our mother. Are you too cool?
Now, with Heartbeat Alaska, here's Jeannie Green.
Hello everyone and welcome to Heartbeat Alaska. Hello to our new viewers across Canada over the APTN network. So glad to have you with us. Today we travel to northwest segment of Alaska, to the land area around the village of Bering, Alaska. It's going to be a fabulous show. Don't go away.
There's a heartbeat. Heartbeat Alaska, moving new revolution.
Hi, Jeannie.
You will find a country beyond that mountain. Every day as you journey, you will find and learn new things. I will give you wisdom, and your people will honor you because you are wise.
This is a story of a journey of discovery beyond that mountain, exploring and learning from the land. Geologist David Hopkins has focused his lifelong career on unraveling the secrets of the landscape history of the Bering Land Bridge on Alaska's Seward Peninsula that began over 50 years ago in what is now the Bering Land Bridge National Preserve, referred to as Bella, part of the future Beringian Heritage International Park. This is also the story of Bella that is slowly revealing itself through the work of David, his fellow scientists, and the people who have lived there.
I met a man named William Aquillick from Mary's Igloo, who had many stories about Eskimo history. Eventually he wrote a book, People of the Kowaruk, in which he told about the 4 crises or the 4 disasters that have affected Eskimo life. The third one was a great eruption, and undoubtedly that referred to the Lost Jim eruption. Well, we're on the Lost Jim flow, and this happens to be where I had my very first independent project when I was, 23 or 24. I was sent up here to study permafrost, and nobody had studied permafrost in the U.S. before, so nobody told me how to study it. So I began doing whatever I thought was interesting and informative. And I also didn't know much about volcanoes. So I was astounded to find myself on this huge volcanic lava flow that's about 30 miles long and maybe 5 miles wide. I didn't know how old it was. Now I know it's about 1,600 years old, near the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. So here's a lava tube in cross-section that you can see in this collapse. This is how this flow got so long. It was insulated from the open air by a thick top of lava that had already cooled and crystallized, so the lava could flow 30 miles without losing much heat through these tubes. There were some much bigger tubes elsewhere. These rocks have been completely broken by frost now. These are actually cooling cracks. When the flow was cooling, fractures developed, and so those were where snow and frost could collect and rotate the blocks and gradually break it up worse and worse. So it just looks just like a jigsaw puzzle that somebody's been shaking up and down. Another way that we know we're on an older flow is that we're beginning to see some dirt on the flow. And what this dirt is windblown dust. And much of this region is covered by thick layers of dust that accumulated during cold periods when the sea was dry and the river was flowing across the floor of Kotzebue Sound. Beautiful. I began to realize, first, I was on a piece of the land bridge. Second, that I had a sort of unprecedented opportunity to learn a lot about it. I began thinking, pretty soon writing papers about the land bridge. Bella is really precious to me because in the first place, it's where I did my doctor's thesis, around Immerok Lake. I mapped a pretty sizable area.
It was in the Immerok Lake area, a region of ancient volcanic activity in the northern part of the Seward Peninsula in the 1940s, where Dave's ideas about the land bridge really evolved. Dave, a geologist, realized that unraveling the mysteries of the land bridge needed the expertise of many different kinds of scientists.
I had with me young guys, students who were zoologists and botanists, so we learned a lot also about the wildlife and about the flora. And as a consequence of my work, Paul Collinville came up and took this remarkable core. It's only about 10 meters long, but it covers 250,000 years of Earth history. That came out of Immerok Lake. Bob Sigafus and I wrote a USGS bulletin, which I think is one of the best things I ever wrote, called Frost Action and Vegetation Patterns.
Well, I was first influenced by Dave long before I knew him as a graduate student, getting interested in the Arctic and what's going on, what makes the Arctic tick. Dave had a tremendous series of publications beginning about 1949, largely centered on the Seward Peninsula, but with dealing with things that are of broad significance throughout the Arctic, throughout the zone of permafrost and of very cold climate, physical processes and geologic products.
The ancient volcanic flows initially studied by Dave in the Immerok Lake area provided the building blocks for the prehistoric Inupiaq to construct their winter dwellings, hunting blinds, and meat storage caches. Two ancient volcanic twin calderas in this region have been an important geological feature for the Inupiaq over the centuries. Along with these, there are spectacular groups of stone monuments that perhaps mark the boundaries between distinct cultural territories in late prehistoric times.
In 1985, we found this rodent burrow, and we found charcoal that had been dug up and kicked out from under the wall. And so the radiocarbon date of that charcoal is about 300 years before present. So it suggests that this may have been utilized in the 17th century.
Cairns of lava rock were built for caribou drive lines called Inuksut. Caribou were driven through this trough into the caldera, a natural corral during fall hunts. Archaeological sites here dating back 5,000 years ago show the area's long-standing importance to indigenous peoples. By the mid-1800s, caribou disappeared from this landscape for reasons not totally understood. This was a hardship for the people, so domestic reindeer were brought to the region in the late 1800s, changing traditional subsistence lifestyles of the hunter-gatherers to include that of herding. Each summer, a variation of the ancient pursuit of caribou is carried on, only today it is the annual reindeer roundup. Dan Carman was born in Deering and has participated in Deering's annual reindeer roundup since his childhood.
I think it's been quite an experience, a learning process that's been passed on to at least my family members that's been in the reindeer business. That's been passed on from my father since 1916. It's amazing that the remnants of that herd from 1916 is still in the family. And we're trying to carry out the same traditions and passing it on to my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's one of the brighter things I enjoy working with reindeer. It's a practice that I make a part of my life because it seems like every time I go to it, I am revitalized in my whole body just because being at a reindeer handling, you know, just bringing back memories of how I was raised up.
In the past, these roundups would have only been for meat. Today, reindeer bring in extra money for the village. Reindeer horn, when it is in its soft velvet state, are cut off and sent to Asian markets, where they are highly prized for their aphrodisiac qualities.
It's been a practice, especially with the community of Deering that I know of, and there's other communities on the peninsula that also enjoy that same thing in having the people working together and learning together on the way that you should handle reindeer.
Roundup is also a time to castrate the adult males, check the health of the herd, and weigh and vaccinate the fawns. As it was in the past, the entire village participates in this exciting but exhausting 24-hour period.
All the kids I know are enthused about the reindeer handling, that because they take part in a practice that's been occurring for 100 years, and hopefully they'll become a part of it as they grow older.
The village of Deering lies on the shores of Kotzebue Sound at Cape Deceit. Its mighty bluffs held important scientific information for other scientists, and for Dave, who was studying climate change in the 1960s.
I got more and more preoccupied with what we could reconstruct of past climates. I mean, if you study glaciers at all, you're already studying something that reflects conditions different from the present. John Matthews did a study of Cape Deceit about that time. That was a pioneering paleoecology study of based on insects, seeds, spruce needles, and all kinds of stuff like that. Beringia is spectacular mainly because the paleogeography changes so dramatically when you change sea level. The amount of land changed enormously, the distance to the sea changed enormously, and the climatic consequences of this were very drastic. I flew over Devil Mountain Lake. There were two intersecting oval lakes, and concluded it was a meteor crater. Well, finally John Cross landed me on the beach of Devil Mountain Lake, and it was immediately obvious that it was a volcano, a volcanic maar, an explosion crater.
The Devil Mountain Maar, a rimless volcanic crater, is the largest maar in the world.
This is ash of an eruption that took place 17,500 years ago at a tremendous volcanic crater called Devil Mountain Lake. The ash fell on a surface and it buried whatever vegetation there was on the surface. We've been very interested in this because this represents the coldest part of the Pleistocene, 17,500 years ago. And there have been a lot of arguments about what kind of vegetation grew in Beringia at that time. Was it rich, lush grassland, something like Serengeti Plain, which actually some of us have suggested? Or was it an Arctic desert like maybe Ellesmere Island? And some years ago, in 1968, I stumbled on a place where this ash was present, and underneath it, grass and woody stems were found. So this probably tells us that the early part of land bridge summers were very warm and very dry. The late parts were very rainy, and the soils were thoroughly wet at the time of freeze-up. And if there was a lot of ice in the soil, that also made thawing a very slow process. It looks to me like a mammoth would have had a hard time getting a full meal, though, out of what was growing on this surface.
Sometime after the eruption of the Devil Mountain volcano, the first people crossed the land bridge into North America. At least 9,000 years ago, small groups of these early hunters camped at Trail Creek Caves, located not far from the modern village of Bering, leaving behind their finely flaked hunting implements and the remains of small campfires. This is a special reunion for Dave and anthropologist Charles Lucier. Joined by archaeologist Jean Schaaf, they are revisiting a landmark archaeological site discovered by Dave Hopkins.
But so beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Dave was the first scientist to explore Trail Creek Caves, the site of the earliest known people on the Seward Peninsula. He learned about the site from his friends John and Bessie Barr Cross.
John Cross, an old bush pilot that I worshipped, took us out in his underpowered Seabee flying around the country. After my first year around Immerich Lake, I had different things I wanted to see, and John had some things he wanted to show me. One of them was caves in Trail Creek.
This is a Inupiaq design here.
Let's see.
So whether maybe Gordon, I've forgotten his Eskimo name, Inupiaq name, but he might have made these. I bet he did.
At Dave's urging, archaeologist Helja Larsen, assisted by Charles Lucier and others, excavated the caves in 1949 and 1950. Dave and Charles first met at Trail Creek in 1949.
Oh, nice to be here.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, what I recall was Helja told me, well, you'd go in and clean back to permafrost, and then you'd leave it alone. So I've had a lot of things to keep the caves very much alive in my mind, but I don't think I've set foot here for 45 years.
Plausible for somebody building a fire, for instance. I mean,
The entrance to the creek is a gorge with big willows in it, so I must say my heart was palpitating as we made our way up the creek through the willows, knowing how many bears were likely to be in this valley. So we went on hands and knees in the cave, and what I remember was knife in my teeth, a 30-06 in one hand, and a flashlight in the other. And we went all the way to the back of the cave and didn't see a single bear. So pretty soon it occurred to me that, well, I have half the picture. I have the Alaska coast, but I've never seen the Siberian coast. Then, in 1969, I was encouraged to seek a National Academy of Science Fellowship, and I went to Russia for 3 months. On that first trip, did I get to Bering Strait? No, far from it. And then, at last, I got to the shores of Bering Strait. It was really gratifying because I had given up hope. In 1975, I thought, well, I'm just not going to live long enough to go do field work on the coast. You can imagine what a gift it was, what a gift to me when I was able to go. Geologically, to oversimplify slightly, it's a mirror image of Seward Peninsula. But the summer climate is much colder and the winter climate is milder. So it looks much more Arctic
on the Russian side. There's almost no willows near the coast in Chukotka. I was very surprised to find no ice wedges on the Chukotka side. But evidently the reason is that it's a much damper climate and there's much more snowfall there. And also the winter climate is not quite so extremely cold. I think there's enough snow to insulate the ground and prevent ground cracking, and which is essential for ice wedges. And if there's no ice wedges, you won't really get thaw lakes. There is permafrost.
Yeah, we have the gravels. In fact, the little gravels are getting into the basal trash layer.
Well, you know these things, these ice wedges start as frost cracks. And if an ice wedge as wide as this would take, I would estimate, probably 1,000 years to form. So one thing we know out of this is that there's a sort of 1,000 years when ice wedges were forming in this oxbow deposit, even before the thaw lake took place. It's amazing how much detailed information you can extract out of an exposure.
During the ice ages, the landscape became inflated with ground ice and deep ice wedges. Now the formation of thaw lakes is the dominant process. Thaw lakes form when water pools on the frozen tundra. As the sun heats the pool, the frozen sides and bottom begin to melt away. Wave action increases the erosive action, and the pond grows until the shore is breached by a river or another lake and drained suddenly. This thermal erosion causes deflation of the landscape. Large earthen hummocks like these are called bijuraks in Siberia. They are the earthen cores left when the networks of large, deep ice wedges melt down. Together with thaw lakes, they show how the landscape has deflated in today's milder climate.
At the front of glaciers, water's melting. It's full of sediment. We get braided streams very overloaded. They've got so much stuff in them that they plug their channels and jump in another channel. So when the river level is low, the wind can sweep dust and sand off these braided floodplains. This has affected all areas of the Bering Land Bridge Park. All areas of the park are mantled with considerable amounts of wind-blown dust, up to maybe 40 or 50 feet thick.
Dave has attracted several new young scientists to the Bering Land Bridge. Much of their innovative research has been funded by the Shared Beringian Heritage Program for the proposed Beringian Heritage International Park and the sharing of knowledge across the Bering Strait.
I'll bet a six-pack that if we look through a clinometer, set it for level, that we would find that we're standing just about at the level of the mammoth tusk.
He's been a superb mentor to several generations of students. And this is one thing I'd like to think that we all can learn from Dave, is that science consists not only of doing very good scientific work in itself, but of interrelating with others, and then ultimately of being able to pass on your knowledge, your techniques, your outlook, and your encouragement to generations of people coming along. So Dave's played a very big part in my life that way, as a mentor and as somebody that's encouraged me at various crossroads in my career.
It's a little bit below it, but above the top of the gravel there.
I lost a six-pack?
Maybe we could split one.
Okay.
One of the best things I think I've learned about him is how to be wrong and how to do science without fear in a way. You don't always have to be right. You should do the work and interpret it the way that you see it, and leave it at that. And it's a stepping stone. Whether you're absolutely right or absolutely wrong, it's still a stepping stone for the scientists after you. The point is to be mostly interested in the truth, you know, not interested in whether you're right or wrong, but to really care about the truth. And I think if that's your philosophy, you'll always welcome the new advances and the changing of your work.
Don't believe everything I say. Question me. Argue with me. I might be wrong. I often am. And I've succeeded in teaching my students that.
which is fun but sometimes annoying. Nothing's constant but change. The land is always on the move. On hillsides, things are constantly moving slowly down slope. Here, whatever the surface, it's going to see another layer of dust the next time there's a big wind. Maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years from now, glaciers will be much bigger and there'll be no trees, and we'll have a new loess blanket laid on this very scene. Peat is accumulating. The minute the river abandons a piece of land and moves elsewhere, soils begin to form. Plant detritus begins to collect on the ground. Finally, it's thick enough so that it becomes waterlogged and freezes and permafrost rises. These changes are constant almost anywhere we look. We can see dramatically that the hilltops have a very mobile mantle. We can see them encroaching on the stream bottoms, and we can see on the tops of the hills where the soil mantle is gradually pulling away, exposing rocks, or sometimes tors, those piles of bedrock, which are really just places that kind of the last place to move at the very top of the hill. The vegetation was rather static during the first part of the century, and then about 1955 we began to notice these changes of shrubbiness and small trees moving out into the tundra. Pretty clearly it's warmer summers. Nowadays I can travel around in boots or on this floe in tennis shoes. In the 1940s I never wore hiking boots. I always wore rubber shoes of some kind because the tundra was always wet and summer's always chilly. Well, of course, I think this is a local expression of a global phenomenon. I don't know that we can place an abrupt warming at around 1955 everywhere, as I think we can here. But I think, indeed, this is simply a part of a more global change in climate that is affecting all of us.
Beringia and the Arctic in general are very important to global climate change, and maybe as an indicator of global climate change. I think some of the first effects of those changes will be seen in the Arctic, and maybe the most dramatic effects.
Humans have reached the point on this planet where their activities can change our whole habitat, our whole Earth, and that should be a cause of worry, because we're not able to agree on things enough to be able to control this. We can just cause global scale accidents, it seems.
Thank you everyone for joining us for another Heartbeat Alaska. Please feel free to call us at 907-563-7440. Get your camcorder out, won't you, and share your news with us. Simply record your village or your tribal event. Send it to me. I'll edit it into a story. Thank you once again for inviting us into your home. God bless you. We'll see you again next week for more Heartbeat Alaska.
Sinuna to me inining man ser say takluting ser tar tingasin imana ko to kibun maksum kibuning man pitlay king sulay pa na tikim